Hi, I am Rainy. I was born in the Sichuan province of China. I am a friend to my mother, but we do not rely on each other too much. My parents were separated, and when I was studying at primary school, my father didn't take responsibility to take care of me, so my mother raised me alone. Since the third year of my primary school study, I left my mother and went to live with my grandmother. However, after entering the junior school, I then came back to live with my mother and stayed with her until I finished high school. During this period, I was busy with my studies. I had few opportunities to communicate with my mother. When I started my undergraduate and postgraduate studies, I went far away from my mother. This meant that I became more independent and relied less on my mother. In my primary school years, my mother asked me advice on whether or not to remarry. I told my mother she could make any decision as long as she felt happy. As I had to grow up without my father, I was more mature and independent than my peers. For this reason, it can be said we have both led our own lives and we do not bother each other. Except for the financial support provided by my mother, I did not have any other types of support from her. I was able to live my life independently. My mother also never interrupted my own plans. Previously, I used to complain about the fact my mother did not give me complete family and full love. However, after growing up, I stopped complaining. Now I live in Australia, and I rarely miss my mother in daily life. I do talk to her when I have something important to discuss, and we communicate with each other a few times each semester. Actually, in this term, I've only communicated with my mother 2 or 3 times. Our recent contact was due to Mother's Day in May. I ordered flowers online as a gift to my mother and added a card with the words, "Happy Mother's Day."
My name is Peng Liu. I come from a family of 3 in Tangshan, China. As Cherry and I have known each other for many years, I've told her a lot of things about my mother. After the class, we met each other in my studio. When talking about my mother's day, I also told her that she ordered followers online for his mother. My mother is tough and powerful and a woman of principle. She makes important decisions for me, especially those decisions related to the future of my life, and she's also guided me. However, she usually has not allowed me to refuse these decisions. For example, we've had conflict with my mother because we have different opinions about whether I need to study a master's degree. She insisted that I had to do this degree, but I refused to do so at the beginning. For this reason, we stopped speaking with each other for half a year. Finally, I chose to follow my mother's choice so that we started to speak again. Therefore, I'm kind of a follower of my mother's wants. I'm like a dog and she's my owner. She's my employer and I'm the employee. However, it's interesting that although my mother seems to be strict and tries to control me, we also communicate with each other rather frequently in our daily lives. Before high school, I lived with my family, and then I went to Australia and stayed there until now. Every week, I have a voice or a video chat with my mum online. Another interesting fact is that I usually use my mother's nickname when I speak to her, like Old Yan or Little May. Sometimes we travel together, enjoying each other's company. I think my mother's most obvious characteristic is that she's very interesting. This is because she's open and she's easy to talk with. She was willing to play well with children, and in important situations, my mother is very principled and independent. My name is Zane and I come from a family of 3 in Shanghai. I last had a conversation with my mother on the 19th of May 2016 on the first floor of Building 50 with Cherry. I think my relationship with my mother is that I'm not really that acquainted with her. Actually, Cherry asked me to find a picture of my mother, but because I just didn't have one, I wasn't able to give it to her. Even if I was living in the same city as my mother, we rarely would see each other. When I do spend time with my mother, we tend to eat meals together, but we don't talk much. When Cherry asked me what I did on Mother's Day, I told her that I'd sent my mother a simple greeting card and asked her to take care. But based on my memory, I think that I've never really got her gifts or sent her blessings on Mother's Day before. I think there's a generation gap between me and my mother. We have a range of different opinions that lead to unnecessary conflicts. Therefore, I think by reducing my communication with my mum, I avoid these conflicts. In addition to this, our relationship can probably be best explained as unfamiliar. I tried to reduce my financial reliance on my mother. My mother, she's traditional Chinese and she spends a lot of her time earning money to ensure that her children can have a good quality of life. So in this it can be said that my mother is willing to devote her time to her family and her maternal life. However, she failed to support me spiritually, and I've tried not to depend emotionally on my mother for that sort of support. However, after my conversation with Cherry, I began to talk more with my mother, and I've had a lot of conversations with Cherry, who's become a really important friend to me. Actually, she's changed my life and my attitude towards my family and my friends. Thank you, Cherry.
I come from a family of 5, including father, mother, younger sister, and me. Compared to an ordinary Chinese family, it's rare to see a situation where a family has 3 kids in modern Chinese society. As the eldest, I am hardworking and thoughtful, and I help my parents with the household chores. I describe the relationship between myself and my mother as mother and daughter, but when we consider this is just a normal mother and daughter relationship, compared to most families, my mother is more like a daughter, and I seem to play more of a mother character. To some extent, love from a family towards children cannot be completely balanced, and this is the reason why I need to be more hardworking and thoughtful as the oldest child. In our conversation, I said once when we were moving house, my mother had chosen to relax and rest after work, where she could have been active, hardworking at packing and tidying up. As I grow up, I was more independent at making choices on some of her personal matters. And I also started making various decisions and selections for my mother. In regarding this, my kind of character interchanging in life, I answer, this is why I know how to do more things, because my mum is not that hardworking. I can contact my mother 2 or 3 times a week through a video chat. Before Mother's Day, I prepared a lot of presents for her, like skin products, a necklace, and also sent her best wishes through a video on that day.
I usually have a pretty indifferent attitude towards people and events. My relationship with my mother is distant. Most people don't really understand what I mean when I say distant. And when Cherry asked me to be part of this conversation, I was pretty indifferent. I didn't really want to be part of it. I was negative about the memories of my mother, and in most conversations I've had when people ask me about her, I just remain silent. After countless attempts with Cherry trying to talk to me, I finally told her that my mother died of liver cirrhosis when I was 8. At 5, I'd left my mother and I was sent to live with my grandparents because she was so ill. From what I can remember, for more than 2 years, when my mother got sick and then she passed away, we weren't able to talk or be with each other. So when I mentioned my mother, or my mother's mentioned after I've been an adult, I find it hard to remember. I was calm and I wasn't too sad when I heard about my mother dying. Maybe it was because I was so young and I didn't really have a good concept of death. So the relationship between my mother and me is distant. And I only have a few photos of when me and my mother were together before the age of 5.
I am Cherry, coming from a lovely family of 4, as a researcher of this project and a research object. Part of the reason why I do this research, the relationship between mother and children at a long distance, is because I stay far away from my mother. This makes me desire to know more about the relationships between my peer group and their mothers. When studying at primary school, I lived with my father and my mother. However, because of the birth of my brother, my mother had to spend less time accompanying me, and my grandmother took care of me more. After graduating from primary school and to seek a better education, I had to follow my parents' arrangement and went to another city for junior and high school study. This meant I had to leave my mother. During 6 years of studying, my mother went to see me every weekend. After I graduated from high school, I went to Australia to get my bachelor and my master's degrees. During this period, the time I spent with my mother became less and less. Some people may think this could make a relationship between me and the other person isolated and unfamiliar. Nevertheless, I was clingier to my mother, more so than my peer group. The relationship between myself and my mother is Cirrus and Big Tree, because my mother gave me full material and spiritual support. She's like a big tree, sheltering me from rain and storm. As I grow up gradually, I'm willing to share any dribs and drabs of my life with my mother. She taught me as a child, she also thought of me as a child who would never grow up into an adult. The relationship between me and my mother is so close that every day she sends me messages and asks whether I have eaten, slept on time, worn warm clothes, and done my chores. In my life, every time I see something my mother loves, I will miss her and share it with her. On every festival that deserves celebrating, I will send best wishes and presents to my mother. Even though I'm 1,000 kilometres away from her, I send wishes to her through the internet. Before Mother's Day in 2016, I purchased the skirts and handbags my mother loved in advance and sent it to her with a blessing and a message to her on that day. When talking about my mother, the first word I come up with is warm. When facing difficulties and frustrations independently, my mother uses her patience and encouragement to help me live in another country in a happy mood. Hi, I am Thao, Vietnam. I have been to Australia and have left my mother for the last 5 years, and I'm really happy to participate in Cherry's project. It's a really meaningful project. I was born into a family that includes my parents and 9 other siblings. and it's amazing how my parents have been able to hold us all together. Unlike other friends of mine whose parents are open-hearted to their happiness as well as their depression and share their love publicly, my mum is quiet and concealed in showing her love. Her life is silence. Talking about my mum, I don't have many things to say, but her enormous sacrifice for us and unconditional love towards us. My mother has spent her entire youth taking care of my siblings and me. Also, time has taken the health of my mother and leaves my mother very ill. For this reason, I describe my mother as a flower, and I'm not a gardener. In my view, however, my mother is vulnerable, and her as a flower, she needs to be protected. I treat it as a daily task in my life. I will do whatever it takes to protect my mum and make her happy for the rest of her life. We have lots of good memories together. One of the memories I want to share is I remember it was raining in the middle of the night and it was pouring. About an hour later, the windows of where we were sleeping opened up by the wind and water started to gush into our beds. As a result, we were completely soaked. Then my mum and me went outside and tried to close the windows, but we couldn't because the wind was too strong. However, my mum did not give up. We kept trying different ways to close the windows, and in about half an hour, luckily, the wind stopped just when we had decided nearly to give up. We finally breathed a sigh of relief. It was fun for me though. Even though we didn't have a proper place to sleep, we were just really happy to help each other in such a miserable and hard situation. Last time I called her was Sunday. We were just talking about her health and how she was feeling. I tried to give her more positive thoughts about her health, and maintain the happiness. She's an angel and an idol in my life. I am trying to make her happy every day, but not yet do I really know what to do for her. That day will happen when she will be free, loved, and respected by others.